Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we've got another low-cost smartphone to take a look at today. This is the Blue R1 Plus, and this is basically a larger version of the R1 HD that you can get on Amazon for about $60 subsidized with ads. This one sells for $160 but has no ads and is carrier unlocked, and you'll see some of the differences that this phone has from its cheaper variant as we get through the rest of the review here. I did want to mention, though, in the interest of full disclosure, that this came in free of charge from Blue. However, nobody is paying for this review. All the opinions you're about to hear are my own, and no one is reviewing this content before it is posted. All right, so let's step through the hardware now. This is a larger version of that R1 phone, so it's got a 5.5-inch display versus a 5-inch display on the other one. This one is 720p, just like the other one is, but you're still getting about 267 points per inch on the screen, so it does look very sharp, very retina-like if you are following the Apple description for high-resolution displays. So I'm pretty pleased with how the screen looks overall. Good viewing angles on it, IPS. Seems to be a pretty responsive touch display also, and I'm quite pleased with how all of that is working. Inside of this one, you've got a MediaTek 6737 with a Mali T720 GPU. It's just a little bit of a bump of over the processor on that R1 HD. So I'm not seeing any performance differences on this one versus that one, but it does seem to be doing things quite well as that other phone did, and I don't think you need more than that for the price you're paying here. Runs Android 6.0 Marshmallow. I do not know if you'll ever get an upgrade to Nougat with these low-cost phones. You might not. You'll have to check with Blue's website down the road to see if they plan on doing that in the future. This one, for that $159 price tag, has 3 gigabytes of RAM and 32 gigabytes of internal flash storage, and you can also add an SD card to it if you wish, and we'll take a look at that in a little bit. This is a low-cost phone, so you do not have a fingerprint reader, so you will need to type in your passcode or do one of those lock things to get into it, so just bear that in mind. Again, you're not paying all that much, and there are some features that you won't get that are on more expensive phones. On the side here, you just have your power switch and your volume rocker. The back here is metal. It feels really nice and solid. Actually, the whole phone really feels pretty nice and solid. It does have Gorilla Glass on the front here, so it does have a very sturdy feel to it. They do give you a case in the box also, so it's not a great case, but it's certainly better than nothing, so you can easily protect your phone out of the box there. The cameras in the back are improved over the original version, so this is a 13 megapixel camera versus an 8 megapixel on the other one. It does some pretty nice pictures, actually. You can see a few that I took out in my yard earlier. So if you go into 13 megapixel mode, it does do a more square photo. If you are at 10 megapixels, it'll give you a wider 16:9 shot, but it does work pretty nicely. It is supposedly able to do 1080p video. However, I have the launch day version here with the launch day firmware, and the 1080p video recording isn't working yet. In fact, the video isn't working well at all. They did promise an over-the-air update, and when that comes down, I'll do a follow-up video on my extras channel so you can see the video quality out of here. But the other version of the phone, the R1, actually has pretty passable 1080p video, and I would expect once they work out that over-the-air update, this one should have that as well. And again, we'll do an update as we get further along here. There is a flash for that camera. On the front, you've got a 5 megapixel camera along with a selfie flash. These are features that are both on the original. So better camera on the back. I think it's the same one on the front here. On the bottom, you just have a USB connector. This is micro USB for charging, not USB Type-C. But it's easy to get everything charged up. It doesn't support fast charging, but it does support charging at 2 amps from a tablet power adapter, for example. They do give you a 2 amp power plug in the box. This also has some compatibility with T-Mobile that's lacking on the other one, so it does support band 12 on LTE for T-Mobile, which I know is important to some folks. It also has a gyroscope on it, which was lacking on the original, so if you're playing Pokemon Go and you want to have the Pokemon flying around with your environment there in the AR mode, you can do that. It'll also work, of course, with Google Cardboard and some other things. Now, you have to pry off the metal backing here to get the SIM cards installed. I got mine started already. It is a little bit of work to get this back casing removed. In fact, they give you a little guitar pick that you have to kind of wedge into this spot right here to get the case off. So there's a little bit of work to get the case off of the phone, but once it's off, you can then install your SIM cards. Now, it has 2 micro SIM slots, so you can use it on 2 different carriers. Very useful if you're traveling between countries and whatnot. You also have a micro SD card slot over here that supports up to a 64 gigabyte card. The battery is here, and this battery is larger than what is in the other phone, 4,000 milliamp hours versus 2,500 milliamp hours, but it's not removable, so just bear that in mind. But the battery life is much better on this one than the other phone. Battery life always varies based on tower conditions and everything else that you're doing on the phone, but I can safely say in my eye testing, if you're using it moderate distance away from your nearest cell phone tower and doing email and web browsing and that kind of stuff, I think you'll definitely get at least a full workday, if not more, out of it. And of course, you'll see a little bit of a battery drain if you're gaming on it or doing things that are taxing the CPU. But I was quite pleased with the battery. It's got a nice big battery in here, and I think it will perform quite nicely. Now, the phone doesn't really perform much better than what we saw on the R1 HD. That's not necessarily a bad thing because these phones are low cost and actually deliver a decent smartphone performance for that price. So I'm not going to ding it there. You're getting much better battery life and a larger screen here in the more expensive version. Things like YouTube here work just fine. The videos come up very quickly here, as you can see. Looks pretty nice on the 720p display here. I am on my wireless network inside the house here, so it supports Wi-Fi, but only the 2.4 gigahertz band. It does not support wireless AC, but I think given what it's got for hardware inside, 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi is fine. It's got a nice loud speaker here on the back. It's not stereo, but you can hear it. It's actually surprisingly loud, probably because it's firing off the back there. They've got more room for the speaker given that, and it sounds pretty good. So you can get the volume you need if you're on a speakerphone call, for example, but you can also plug in some headphones here or use a Bluetooth device if you want better quality audio on there. Let me pop out of here and just go over to Google Chrome. We'll take a look at the NASA webpage for a second and see how that loads up. Again, we're on Wi-Fi here, so it'll be a little faster on my Wi-Fi than it might be on your cellular network, but media-rich sites do load up on here a little slower perhaps than they might on a more expensive flagship phone, but you do get everything loaded up here pretty nicely and quickly, and it does look pretty nice on the screen. It's actually very easy to read this screen, and by and large, this is a very good and inexpensive smartphone experience. Now, the processor and GPU in here is not a gaming powerhouse, but it will play games quite well, primarily because most developers are targeting things around where this hardware comes in. There are far more cheaper phones out there than expensive flagships, so things like Grand Theft Auto Vice City here work quite well. Good frame rates on this, very steady. Even when you've got a lot of things going on screen, there really isn't any noticeable performance dips here, so this works really nicely. And then when you've got the 3 gigabytes of RAM in this phone, as I have with this one, as you'll have as well if you get one, switching between apps is usually pretty quick here because you're able to keep a lot of the apps in memory when you're switching between them, so you don't have to go back in and load everything else up from scratch here. So I can go from Minecraft here and then load up my screen here and then jump right back into where my Vice City game left off without really any loading time here. So that's one of the advantages of having extra RAM on these phones, and having 3 gigs is a little bit better than having 2, and some of these phones came in initially with 1 gigabyte of RAM on the original R1 HD, so going from 1 to 3 is actually a pretty big jump, and you'll see some decent performance on here. And again, it does have the gyroscope on this one, which is lacking on the less expensive R1 HD. And on the 3D Mark Slingshot test, which is a higher end graphical benchmark, we got a score of 146, which puts it pretty much where the other phone is, the R1 HD. But I did notice that the physics score on this one, which is more CPU intensive, looked to be a little slower than the R1 HD looked on the prior version of the processor that's inside, although the graphics score was slightly better on this one. So they may have tweaked it a little bit in favor of GPU performance, but you really won't notice much of a difference when you're playing real-world games like Grand Theft Auto there or Minecraft or something like that. So all in, decent for casual gaming, and it will run a good chunk of the Android games that are out there. So that is the Blue R1 Plus, and for the money, this is a very decent phone. It's kind of a basic transportation device, but it is well constructed. So you've got a nice Gorilla Glass screen here, nice thick glass on the front, a nice metal backing on it. It really feels more expensive than it is when you take it out of the box. I think you'll be quite surprised with that. Even on the cheaper version of it, the smaller version of this phone, they really both are well constructed. So you have a nice build quality on them. The performance is adequate. You can run a good chunk of the Android app ecosystem well enough to get whatever work you need done on these things. And I think for people looking for a basic smartphone, these are really all you need in many cases. And for $159 for this one, you could probably buy 7 or 8 of these for what a more expensive flagship phone might cost. So very good choices for kids who just want to play a few games, and if they lose the phone or break it, you're not out all that much money in the process, and there's no carrier commitment either. This does not work on Verizon or Sprint here in the US, but other carriers are compatible. Definitely check the links out that I'll put in the video description to make sure it works with with your carrier, but you can have multiple carriers running on this thing. The apps run decently enough, and this one, which is larger than the smaller version of the phone, costs a little bit more, so it's about $60 more than the regular version of the R1, but you get a larger screen, you get a better camera, a little bit more RAM and storage, and the gyroscope for some gaming tasks and whatnot. So there are a few things that you get here, including that extra battery life that you won't see on the smaller variant of the phone, but they both seem to perform about the same to me. But that's not a bad thing. Again, good, adequate, basic transportation, and definitely another smartphone that I can recommend at a low price. This is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by my Patreon supporters, including gold level supporters Mark Bollinger and Brian Miller. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to Lon.TV/Patreon to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit Lon.TV/S.